Disclaimer: all the story and images/graphics used in the video belong to their respective owners. I or this channel do not claim any rights over them, all credits to the respected owner. Chapter 21, Betting. All those present turned their gazes towards the source of the voice. There, they saw a young man and woman heading their way. All the youths here were from the top families of Inchoate. With Inchoate being closer to Crystal City, they had of course been able to see these two figures. They were well known, and this group of people also respected and admired them. These two newcomers were none other than Steve and Brenda, Jack's half-siblings. They had been staying in Inchoate City in the past 3 days. Their aim was finding who in Inchoate City helped Jack. But, even after staying here for such a long time, they hadn't found a single clue about it. Furthermore, Jack's moves were erratic that they couldn't follow them at all. Today, they had been invited by the second generation of Inchoate City to participate in the racing competition. This was a weekly major event after all. They had accepted, and that was why they were here. But, they had never expected that their brother Jack would also be here. And from what they could see, they found that he was just getting to know these second generation. Now, they knew that he'd no relationship with them. Then, where was he getting the money to buy a sports car? In just a minute, the duo had arrived before the group. As soon as they arrived, the youths immediately began flattering them, wanting to build connections with them. After all, with the help of Alfonso family, it wouldn't be hard for their families to develop. Young Master Steve, young Miss Brenda, welcome, William said with a smile. He stretched his hand for a handshake, but the duo ignored him, causing him to retrieve his hand awkwardly. The others also went ahead to greet them, but after learning from William, none of them stretched their hands forward. After the greetings were over, the group from the top families in Inchoate City were kind of flustered, not knowing what to do next in accordance to Steve's previous words of Jack not participating in the race. You guys don't worry that much. We're here to participate in the race. We'll up the race's prizes. Brenda spoke with a smile on her face. Then, she turned her gaze towards Jack, who was standing there indifferently, and said, Jack, I don't think you should participate in the racing. After all, you're not good at racing. You'll only embarrass yourself, and that's not a good thing. The group of youths were surprised by the fact that it seemed that Jack and the duo knew each other. And from what they could tell, the relationship between them wasn't that good. In fact, it seemed that the two didn't like Jack. On the other hand, Jack seemed not to care about them. Jack glanced at her for a moment before shifting his gaze towards Steve, who was glancing at him with a disdainful gaze. I already told you that you don't have to worry about me. I can handle myself. Furthermore, my reputation doesn't concern you. Jack's voice was quite cold rather than his usual indifferent one. Jack's words caused the atmosphere to tense. The rich second generation didn't know what to do about this situation. Furthermore, they knew that they were not allowed to interrupt the duo, Steve and Brenda, as the moment that they made them dislike them, the families behind them would surely suffer. Come on, little bro. Don't be like that. I've known you since you're young and you've never participated in a race before. So, I'm doing this for your own good. Brenda spoke, ignoring Jack's previous words. The youth's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. They finally found something that linked the three. It seemed that they were siblings. And they had an argument. Since this was a family issue, they won't dare to put in their noses. On the other hand, they were quite surprised that Jack was a member of Crystal City's Alfonso family. Even George, who was beside Jack, finally had some understanding. He'd previously seen Jack's name being Jackson Alfonso. This was the name on his ID and the contract that they'd signed when he took him in as his new employee. Jack frowned. It seems that these two are here to cause trouble for me. But, there's no way that I'm going to let that happen. I have to participate in the race and I'll have to win. Otherwise, I won't have enough time to find another place to race before the time that I was given by the system ends. Jack, why don't you just get lost from here? I am not sure where you got this car from, but I think that you shouldn't participate in this race, Steve arrogantly spoke. Jack looked at him and said, "Why don't we make a bet?" "A bet? Why will we make a bet with a loser like you?" Steve laughed out loud as he looked at Jack funnily. "I know why you guys have been staying in Inchoate City lately. If you win the bet, I'll tell you. If you lose, then you'll have to disappear and never come back to Inchoate City," Jack stated. Upon hearing Jack's words, the two turned and gazed at each other. Then, they saw the same glint in each other's eyes. They turned towards Jack and Steve said, "It seems that your brain is still working well. But, what do you want us to bet on? The stakes are already out. We're betting on the race. Whoever wins the race wins the bet," Jack said. After a moment of silence, Steve burst in a fit of laughter while Brenda chuckled coquettishly, causing the boys around to fix their gazes on her with their faces flushed. "Racing? I thought that you had something else that you wanted us to compete in. Never thought that you would choose the department that you're worse in." After laughing for a while, Steve finally couldn't hold it anymore as he mocked Jack. George frowned as he thought of Jack's superb driving skills. He then wondered to himself, if Jack's driving skills were said to be amateurish, then, didn't that mean that this Steve guy was far better in driving? He couldn't help but wonder. "You betting on it or not?" Jack asked indifferently. He wasn't going to prove anything in words. Only his actions could prove his true capabilities. Okay. Let's bet then." Steve laughed again before calming down to reply. After that, George took Jack to the registration area. Although the rich second generation of Inchoate City were sponsoring the race, they weren't the owners of the competition. So, even they had to register to race, this was the rule. After registering, Jack then shifted his focus to his half-siblings. He knew them too well. Even if he won the bet, he was sure that they would go back in their words and there was nothing that Jack would do them, or so they thought. So, just in case, Jack made a proposal. "Why don't we sign a contract? In this way, none of us will go back on our words." The duo stared at him for a moment. Then, Brenda raised her brows and asked, "You don't trust your family?" "Oh no, I forgot that we're no longer a family." As soon as these words were spoken, the youths were surprised. They stared at Jack, wondering why he would be expelled from the family. But at the same time, they stared at Brenda and the same thought ran through their minds, "What a black-bellied lady! I know you too well." Jack's reply was simple. Brenda could already guess that Jack was talking about the taxi fare. "Jack, you don't have to be that way. Maybe that guy wanted to have more money. I paid him but he asked you for more. Furthermore, it's not like you cannot afford such a small amount of taxi fare, right?" As she spoke, she showed Jack the bank message that showed that she'd transferred $5,000 to the driver. Although Jack didn't know the driver's name, from the date and time, he could already guess that what she said about transferring the money was true. But the purpose, he already knew that it was different. As for her exposing that Jack couldn't afford such a small amount of fare, it was obvious that she was trying to make sure that he was embarrassed. But, Jack wasn't going to be embarrassed at all. "I don't care about that. Let's just sign the contract, to be on the safe side, for me of course," Jack said as he decisively headed towards the area where there was a printing machine. It was a small office. This was the office that was in charge of registration and administration of the racing rewards. After telling them what he wanted, a staff member typed and printed a simple contract. The contents of the contract was simple. The loser of tonight's race, between the two sides, will have to fulfill their end of their bet. If not, they would be banned from participating in a racing competition for 3 years. The organizers of this racing competition had the ability to do that. After all, they were not just based in a single city, but multiple of them, Crystal City included. After signing the contract, it was time to increase the prizes of the race. Steve forked out $3 million while Brenda gave out $2 million, totaling it to $5 million. On the other hand, Jack gave $3 million as well. This made the duo frown, wondering just how much money Jack had in his pockets. But, They didn't ask as they knew that Jack wouldn't tell them even if they asked. They would have to wait till he lost the race. The first position would receive a total of 8 million. The second position would receive 5 million. The third place would get 2.5 million. Now that all the stakes had been placed, each and every one of them that wanted to participate in the racing competition got into their respective cars. Jack got into the driver's seat and George took the co-driver's seat. Then, they waited for the last few minutes to pass so that the race could start. Chapter 22, Extraordinary Driving Skills. Inside the Bentley Continental GT, George looked at Jack with a serious expression. Although he didn't know what had brought Jack's siblings in Inchoate, it seemed important in that even after staying here with their influence, they could still figure nothing out. On the other hand, what Jack wanted was for them to scram and leave Inchoate City. Just from this, he could tell that the relationship between the siblings wasn't good at all. Steve had said that Jack's driving skills were at the amateur level. George himself had seen how well Jack was in driving. But, if that was considered amateur, then that Steve was supposed to be a professional racer. If his boss lost, not only would his reputation be stained, after all, he was the one that had initiated the bet, but also, the other second generation from Inchoate City would likely go against him to please Brenda and Steve. "Boss, are you sure about winning this race?" he asked when he saw that Jack's face didn't have any hint of nervousness at all. In fact, he'd only seen his boss smile twice, and that was just for an instant. As for getting angry, he'd never seen him get angry at all. The only thing that was usually etched on his handsome face was indifference. "Don't worry about that. If I couldn't win, then why would I want to bet with them? I might as well tell them what they wanted to know, or I might as well say nothing and leave," Jack replied while his hands held the steering wheel. George nodded upon hearing this. After all, with the current law, there was absolutely no way that the duo could force Jack to say what he didn't want to say. So, he decided to keep quiet and wait for the time. Just like that, they stayed in the car playing with their phones, for Jack and chatting for George. At exactly 6:45 p.m., the engines of the cars roared. And with the roars of the cars, the mountain area was lit up. The lights that had already been set up before were lit, illuminating the racing tracks, of course, just the normal tarmac mountain road. The spectators immediately began cheering for those that they were supporting. There were several discussions on who was going to win the race and so on. As the cars drove towards the starting line, the crowd cheered even louder. After all, that was a lineup of sports cars. There were Aston Martins, Nissan, McLaren, Bentleys and other brands of sports cars. There were some that had a hobby of collecting the images of sports cars. And this was the right place. Jack drove his Bentley Continental GT to the starting line. He could see that all the cars present were worth at least $1 million and above. Furthermore, the Big Five all had cars worth at least $5 million. By coincidence or not, on Jack's left side of the starting line, Steve stopped there. Brenda winded down the car window as she looked at Jack curiously. Jack hadn't closed the car window and as a result, he could be seen by the duo. "Are you sure about this, Jack?" Brenda smiled as she asked. She was sitting on the co-driver's seat inside a Lamborghini Huracan. This was the most expensive car in the lineup present today. It was worth $11 million. That included the costs of modification. Jack glanced at her before turning his gaze back to the road. He knew that she was just taunting him, nothing much. After all, he knew that she was quite anxious about Jack's source of money. All of this was so that she could make sure that he didn't have a penny on him. Seeing that Jack had ignored her, Brenda was displeased as she pursed her lips tightly. "Just you wait. After this race, I'll see where you'll hide when we beat you to the ground." She had complete confidence in Steve's driving skills plus the car that they were in. Steve had won several races back in Crystal City and could be considered a young genius racing driver. Pooh. Vroom. 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 As soon as this sound echoed in the air, all the engines of the cars present revved wildly. Their headlights shone more intensely, illuminating further the already lit path. The cheers from the crowds began echoing, although they couldn't be heard well due to the loud roaring of the engines. At this time, a large screen descended in front of the cars, on top of the pillar that was standing tall in front of the starting line. On it were the names of the cars and their drivers. At the very top of the screen, there was a countdown to the start of the race. As the 5 seconds countdown went down slowly, the engines roared even fiercely. Inside the Bentley Continental GT, Jack gripped the steering wheel tightly as he gazed at the screen. His foot was already on the accelerator and the car was ready to charge forward at a moment of notice. Currently, there were more than 15 cars that were going to participate in the race. As for the arrangement on the track, it was in the first-come first-served situation. Those that had registered first were in front and vice versa. Jack was currently closer to the back of the cars. The Bentley Continental GT had a manual and automatic gear system. Currently, Jack was using the manual one. In this way, his control over the car was higher. Vroom! Scree! As soon as the countdown reached 0, he released the brakes, released the clutch, pushed the throttle. With that, the car shot forward alongside the other sports cars. George had already put on his seatbelt. He was the one that was going to tell Jack about the road as this was Jack's first time here. The crowd cheered as they watched the cars disappearing into the distance. There were several drones that had cameras on them. Then, there were several screens that showed the current situation of the cars that were racing. On the screens, they could see that the leading car was a Nissan GT-R. But, it wasn't long before it was overtaken by a McLaren 720S. The competition was clearly fierce. This was a one-lap race. But, this one lap wasn't short as it would take these cars at least 30 minutes for them to complete it. One had to know that these were all sports cars and they were moving at their maximum possible speeds. The record that had been set so far was a car that had finished the lap in 31 minutes 52 seconds and 66 milliseconds. Since 5 years ago, nobody had broken that record, not even the record holder who was now a professional racer. Who do you think will win this race? William will definitely take it. Get lost. I know you have a crush on him. But, this time, Kelly will definitely win. Bah, what a shameless guy. Do you think that I didn't see you sneaking her a few glances? Humph. I bet $300 that Anderson will win this race. I bet $1,000 on that Lamborghini. Hey, so you think that just because it's fast it'll win? You don't know about racing at all. This only depends on the driver. Why do you care? It's not like I'm using your money to bet, right? I bet $5,000 on that new Bentley Continental GT. Several people placed their bets on the cars that they thought would win, while others were already daydreaming about what would happen after their idol won the race. On the racing track, Jack was shifting gears like a madman, according to George, of course. Jack's face was currently calm while his eyes were sharp as they focused on the road. His hand moved to shift the gear while the other one remained on the steering wheel. The speed of the car was already past 180 miles per hour and it was still accelerating. Boss, there's a sharp corner towards the left about 700 meters from here, George said as he wiped the cold sweat on his face. He had previously thought that Jack's driving of the Bugatti Veyron was already crazy. But now, he had to change his opinion. This corner was where the leading characters would start emerging. Currently, Steve's Lamborghini Huracan was already in front of them by about 100 meters. After all, its speed wasn't low and it was customized for racing. Jack calmly nodded his head in response as the speed of the car began increasing further. In no time, the speed was already past 200 miles per hour. This immediately frightened George to the core. Boss, did you hear me? There's a sharp corner ahead. George couldn't help but remind Jack about what he'd just said. I know, Jack replied, but he had no intention of slowing down at all. This action immediately attracted the attention of the other drivers as well as the spectators. What the heck with him? Does he want to die? This guy is not slowing down at all. Do you think he's gone crazy? This car is new and so is the driver. Maybe he doesn't know about the track. Ah, this fool. He dares to participate in the race without trying out the road? As the audience and drivers talked, the cars reached the corner. Many of them had already slowed down drastically as soon as they were a few hundred meters from the corner. On the other hand, Jack used this opportunity to surpass most of the cars until there were only 3 cars in front of him, Steve's Lamborghini Huracan being among them. They drifted at the corner at a slower speed before accelerating after getting past it. Jack could see that Steve's skills were indeed good as he did a drift. Furthermore, he was the one that led the race after the corner. On the other hand, Jack didn't slow down at all. He knew that his car had a disadvantage as it was not customized for racing. So, he would be using these corners to his advantage so that he could win the race. As soon as he was just tens of meters from the corners, Jack's professional driving skills kicked in. He stepped on the brake to transfer some weight to the front of the car and flicked the steering to initiate the drift. Maintaining the drift by lifting off the throttle to reduce drift angle, he added more throttle to increase it. He then transitioned the drift by slightly over-rotating the car towards the left just before changing the direction and then lifted off the accelerator. The car slid on the track in such a way that people thought that it was going to turn over. But to their surprise, although the left side tires got off the ground, the car didn't flip. As soon as the car got past the corner, the tires landed onto the ground. Jack then released the throttle at the correct time and eased off the steering angle. Then, he accelerated forward, easily surpassing one of the cars that was in front of him, inside which was the stunned female driver, Kelly. Chapter 23, Well-Deserved Title. Did you see that? Do you think that I am blind? I've fallen for him. You? Even Sir Isaac Newton's law of universal gravity can't allow you to do so. How can you fall for him? Anyway, he's crushing me. Alternate way of saying that Jack is her crush. Get lost, you're daydreaming. Hey, it's 7 p.m. now, it's night, how can I daydream? You ask yourself, after all, you're the one daydreaming, not me. This is a professional driver, a professional racer. Where was he hiding all this time? Maybe he's from another city. Open your dog eyes and see the registration number of the Bentley Continental GT. It's from Inchoate City. You, open your dog brain. Do you think that if I buy a car in Crystal City I'll be a resident there? The commotion caused by Jack's driving skills wasn't small, as even those that were in charge of the racing competition were greatly impressed by his driving skills. On the other hand, Steve frowned the moment that he saw that Jack's car didn't flip over at such a sharp bend. He was wondering what was going on when Brenda, who was seated in the co-driver's seat, spoke. It seems that our little brother has been hiding all these years. What do you mean? Steve asked with a frown as he turned his gaze back to the road. Since he had slowed down drastically, his speed was still accelerating. On the other hand, Jack's Bentley was catching up as it had only reduced its speed by a small amount at the corner. During the past 3 days, he's been going to the government building in charge of the stores found in the city. When we asked about it, we were told that he was purchasing a grocery store, a few of them to be precise. Brenda analyzed. On the first day that we met him here in Inchoate City, he was coming from a store. And now, that store has been turned into a grocery, although it doesn't have the stock yet. He bought a Bentley Continental GT and he has the capital that can be used to start more than 3 grocery stores. Now, he's got good driving skills. I can guess where his money is coming from. Racing. He must have been participating in racing secretly without our knowledge. And now, he's won several prizes in that, he's accumulated quite a sum of money on him. Brenda concluded. Hiss. What a cunning little man. It seems that we've underestimated him, just like his mother. Steve spoke. The car fell into momentary silence. The commotion was brought only when they heard the sound of a car engine approaching them. Looking at the side mirror, Steve could clearly see that currently, the gap between them had been reduced. Furthermore, Jack's Bentley was already closer to overtaking William's Porsche 911 that was currently in the second place. He stepped on the gas as the car accelerated furthermore. Upon noticing this, Brenda frowned and said, "You better stop fooling around. There are several corners up ahead. If you keep up with this speed, there might be an accident." Worry not. I know my limits. Even as he said that, he accelerated further, using the speed of the Lamborghini Huracan to the maximum, increasing the gap between him and Jack and William, who were now at a tie. George took a deep breath as he tried calming down. He had almost been frightened to death when the car almost flipped over. Looking at Jack's calm and indifferent expression, he couldn't help but wonder to himself, was it just a coincidence that the car didn't flip over, or was this due to Jack's professional driving skills? Jack didn't say a word as he continued accelerating. He wanted to win this race well. And winning it well meant that he'd have to give the second place a considerable gap. As for the record, he would of course break it. Ding! It was a sound that came from the car's dashboard. Jack glanced at it and found that the download of the map had been completed. He had decided to completely download the map of Inchoate City so that he could use the car's special navigation system. Now that it was done, he pressed a button that zoomed the map. There, it showed his current position, speed, as well as the road that he was on. So, he marked the finishing line as the end location and navigated from his current position. In a short moment, a path was formed. This path that he could follow was one that the Bentley Continental GT would have no problem in using. "You can tell me if the road that is shown on the map is the one that we're supposed to follow during the race," Jack stated simply to the flabbergasted George. George nodded his head, still in a daze as he stared at the car's navigation system. As time moved, he could see that the map was becoming clear and clear, to the situation where it was almost looking like a satellite map. He could see the car, although not clearly. The path that they were following was currently yellow as it wasn't clear yet. This Bentley's navigation system was quite digital, he thought to himself. In the next moment, he was forced to come back to reality as he stared at the map. Unknowingly, they had already arrived before an S-shaped bend. Although it wasn't a perfect S shape, the corners were quite sharp. So, at this time, William, who was forced to reduce his speed, was already disappearing from the corner. Just like before, Jack did a drift. Unlike the last time, Jack didn't reduce the speed of the car at all on this corner. There were a total of 4 corners so far on the S-bend. And on all of these bends, Jack never slowed down. And the car never showed any signs of flipping over as well. The reason for this was obviously due to Jack's familiarity of the road through the car's navigation system. He could already tell what shape the road was going to take next. As a result, he was able to make ample preparations. On the third corner, Jack passed Steve, who was forced to slow down due to the many corners. Otherwise, he would have ran off the tracks. Jack didn't even spare their Lamborghini Huracan a glance as he overtook them. In the fourth corner, Steve could only see the Bentley Continental GT's taillights. The racing track that was chosen was full of corners. After all, the show of a driver's skills was on these corners. There was absolutely no thrill in racing on a straight racing track. After overcoming his fear, George began enjoying the way that Jack was driving. He also made sure to look at the way that Jack was switching gears. But he was forced to give up as nothing that Jack did made sense to him. So, he put his mind to enjoying the ride. Although he couldn't see what Jack was doing to be able to easily drift on the sharp corners, he made his mind to ask him after this. "Just look at it go. This is what we call driving cars professionally." "Yeah, you're right. All the others are amateurs in front of him." "Ah, I made the right bet. Now, I've earned big." The odds of the Bentley winning was 2.5. Too bad I didn't bet even more. Otherwise, I'd have earned bigger. "Brother, remember that I was the one that told you to place the bet on him?" "Yeah, I remember. But you should have placed a bet as well. Haven't you won too?" "Well, I bet on the Lamborghini." "So, you were trying to make me lose money? And you're still shamelessly stretching over your claws to ask for money? Get lost, you evil creature." Although the race was only halfway, for the first person of course, the spectators already knew who the winner of this race was. But that didn't make them lose their interest in the race as they focused all of their attention on how Jack tackled the corners. Currently, there was nobody who could see the Bentley Continental GT's taillight. Even so, Jack didn't slow down. It seemed that the management had also seen that Jack was what all the spectators were interested in, even those that had lost their bets. Although their hearts were bleeding, they could still endure it to watch the top-notch driving skills. So, all the screens but two were showing the Bentley Continental GT. The other two showed the Lamborghini Huracan and Williams Porsche 911. This was just to give them some face as they were in the second and third place. Vroom! The sound of a roaring engine made the eyes of the spectators to shift from the screen towards the source. And upon seeing the Bentley Continental GT, the crowd was at first stunned before they began cheering wildly. They had been staring intently on the screen and that they forgot that the finishing line was the same as the starting line. So, they had forgotten that the Bentley would still come to the starting point. As the Bentley Continental GT crossed the finishing line, the crowd erupted in cheers. In total, there were about 10,000 people gathered here to watch the race. In such a way, through loud cheers shook the night and traveled till they reached the city. This forced the people that were still outside to look towards Mount Bright. At the same time, those that were in their houses moved the curtains aside as they looked out of the window. The cause of such an eruption wasn't just because Jack had won the race. It was because he'd broken the record that had been set 5 years ago. He'd taken far less time to finish the race. Now, the new record read, 24 minutes 39 seconds and 98 milliseconds. Jack had finished the race in 24 minutes. This was mind-blowing. He'd broken the record by about 7 minutes. Minutes! Not seconds. The crowd was cheering the name Jack crazily. The ladies, if not for the restrictions that prevented them from reaching the area where the participants were, they would have already rushed there to get his number. Driving Deity Jack. Driving Deity Jack. Driving Deity Jack. Driving Deity Jack. That was the slogan that was being shouted when the second place, Steve, arrived almost 9 minutes later, followed by William, who was 10 minutes behind, and finally Kelly, who was just 30 seconds or so behind him. When William alighted from the car, he couldn't help but stare at the calm and composed Jack. He muttered to himself, he surely deserves this title, Driving Deity Jack. With a smile, he headed towards Jack to congratulate him. But he was forced to stop when he saw that Steve and Brenda were ahead of him, as they had already arrived before Jack. Chapter 24, Bountiful Rewards. Jack, why didn't you tell us that you're good at racing? As soon as Brenda arrived before him, she asked with a hint of frustration in her voice. They had previously taunted Jack that he was an amateur in racing only to be badly defeated. There was a gap of more than 9 minutes. That wasn't something that an amateur could do. If Jack was an amateur, then what could Steve be called? Not like I had to tell you everything about me, right? Furthermore, you never asked. Jack shrugged his shoulders as he replied. Brenda stared at him with narrowed eyes, trying to figure something out. But in the end, she was forced to retrieve her gaze as she could see nothing on Jack's indifferent face. Humph! Steve, who was standing beside Brenda, only snorted before turning his face away from Jack. He felt that he had been embarrassed by Jack. Although he was angry, he knew that there was nothing that he could do at the moment. He had previously stated arrogantly that Jack wasn't supposed to participate in the race because he was an amateur. Who knew that he'd misspoken? It was supposed to be that Jack wasn't supposed to participate in the race because he was a driving deity. Then, did you get your money from racing? Brenda asked. This is my first time participating in a racing competition. Jack replied bluntly. Who will believe that? Brenda asked with raised brows. Jack just shrugged and said, not my problem if you believe it or not. Not like I care. Why you? For the first time, Brenda showed her anger. But all the same, Jack didn't care. The only way that this half-sister of his could cause problems for him would be by making sure that the stores that he had opened failed. But who could resist the temptations of money? Jack had money, that was something that he won't be lacking in the future. With the system, why would he be afraid? You should keep your end of the bet, Jack said before he stood up and headed towards the management office of the racing competition. All the money that was supposed to be given to the winners as the prize were all given to the management. In this way, there was no way that the winner of the race would fail to receive what she deserved. As soon as the manager in charge saw Jack approaching, he got out of the office with a smile plastered on his face. He was really enthusiastic about Jack. As a racing competition manager, he was obviously looking for talent that could be signed by his company. "Mr. Jack, I am Peter Hansen, the manager of off-track racers in Inchoate branch." He extended his hand to greet Jack. Jack nodded as he shook the manager's hand. Then, the manager led Jack into his office. The office was nothing special. It only had the important things like a computer and a cabinet for files, which were required for the running of the racing competition. After sitting, Peter spoke, "Mr. Jack, I would like to congratulate you on winning the competition. You are a professional. How long have you engaged in racing?" "Thanks. As for how long I've been racing, this is my first racing competition," Jack replied sincerely. But Peter smiled meaningfully, thinking that Jack didn't want to talk about that. So, he changed the topic. "As we're speaking, the transfers for the prize money is being transferred to your account." In reply, Jack simply nodded as there was nothing that could be said there. "On the other hand, would you like to join us, off-track racers, as a genius racer under us? We'll provide you with all the support that you'll need to enhance your skills. As for the salary and other benefits, you'll not have to worry about them. You'll be provided with the best that our company can offer." Peter went on to try and invite Jack to join them. If Jack agreed to this, then not only would he be promoted, his salary would also be drastically increased. After all, a racing genius like Jack was rare to find. "I'm sorry, but racing is just a hobby and not something that I would like to dedicate my time to," Jack replied. What a joke! Why would he race under another person's company when he could start his own? With the system, there was no way that he was going to lack money to start a business. What's more, he would never suffer losses, as the income multiplier by 100 times was already enough to cover the losses. Seeing that Jack had no intention of joining, Peter felt dejected. But he still smiled and said, "If you ever change your mind, you can contact me. Here's my business card." As he said that, he handed Jack his business card. Jack accepted the card. It wasn't bad to start forming connections. After all, money wasn't enough, as there were things that a person couldn't acquire even if he had money. Although the manager here had a low position, there was no problem starting down to climb upwards. As for changing his mind to participate in racing competitions, he would have to forget about that. At this time, he felt his phone vibrating. Taking it out, he found a bank message. Flyers Bank savings account received $10 million. Current balance is $36,790,607. You've earned $10 million. Multiplier applied. You've received $1 billion. First income. As a reward, you gain a customized Eurocopter EC-135. System task completed. Professional driving skill now permanently belongs to the host. Jack was surprised that he had received $10 million. After all, according to what he knew, he was supposed to receive $8 million. But what about the extra $2 million? As if sensing the question in his gaze, Peter smiled and said, "Since this is your first time, you may have not known this. But the first prize is $2 million. That's what our off-track racers gives out. After all, you spend $50,000 to register for the race. So, you'll have to be rewarded. As for the $8 million, that's what those rich second generation agree on. It's like a bet." Jack finally nodded in understanding. If they were just going to receive the registration fee and give back nothing to the winner, then nobody would be willing to spend so much money to race. He had also received several system prompts that he would have to check out after leaving the mountain. But for the income, he had never expected that he would receive so much money from racing. $1 billion, this was an amount of money that he'd thought that he'd earn only after a month or so. But now that he'd gotten this amount of money, he could as well increase the speed at which his foundation was being built. And the materials for building the foundation would have to be the best. First thing first, he would have to purchase a commercial building. Then, he would see if there were shares that could be bought. After all, $1 billion wasn't the last amount of money that he would be having in this lifetime. The more he invested, the more he earned. Now, he had to go back and see the Eurocopter EC-135 that he had been rewarded with by the system. Walking out of the office, Jack found that George was talking to William and the others. Of course, Ismail didn't seem to like George, but all the same, he just stood there, listening and not saying a word. When they saw him, the group walked towards him as they congratulated him. "Congratulations, Jack." William spoke. "Jack, you said that you were a beginner in racing. But we've seen the replay of your car moves. Your skills are at the professional level," Anderson complained from the side. "Anderson, just beat it. You were not even closer to the second or third place. You were in the 7th place. So, stop complaining and let us, those who were closer to him, talk." A burly guy spoke. He was from the Radvon family, Benjamin Radvon. "Heh, you're talking and you were ahead of me in just 5 seconds. Anderson sneered. "Jack, where did you train how to drive and do those drifts?" Kelly asked. She was from Sapona family. "I trained myself." But Jack's reply made the group stare at him with strange gazes. Then, they laughed at him before waving at him, telling him not to tell them if he didn't want. What's more, they even claimed that he'd signed a confidential agreement. This made Jack puzzled. What's up with these guys? Nobody believes it when I speak the truth? Guess I'll start lying, as they believe lies to be the truth anyway. After interacting with the group for a period of time, Jack finally left with George. Although there were many youths there, Jack had become superficial. The group had invited him to a banquet in 2 days' time. Since he wanted to form connections, he would obviously go. He could get a chance to purchase some shares from the big wigs of Inchoate that would be attending the banquet. As for Brenda and Steve, he didn't see them after coming back from Peter's office. It seemed that they had already left. But what Jack knew was that they wouldn't give up. Although they would not be coming to Inchoate City, that didn't apply to his other half-siblings and cousins. But he wasn't worried. There were other things that he could be worried about, like the girl that was still tormenting his mind. But, all the same, one thing at a time. As he drove the Bentley Continental GT out of the mountain, the crowd of fans hadn't stopped cheering his name. Furthermore, the video of his stunts when driving were posted in the internet. The result was obviously pleasing. "George, I can see that you and those 5 seem to know each other well. What's your real background?" Jack asked as soon as they left Mount Bright. Chapter 25, George Dante. Jack had noticed that, although George was wearing casual clothes, the way that he was being treated by those members of the top 5 families was absolutely different. He had seen that there were several other youths that came from other big families of Inchoate. But all the same, their families couldn't compare to the Big 5. William and the others seemed not to be paying much attention to them. But George was different. The group could enthusiastically chat with him. And what's more, the way they treated him was like he was their equal, and sometimes he could feel that they had some sense of respect for him. A good example of the treatment would be Ismail. If it was another person of Inchoate that wasn't in good terms with him, he was sure that Ismail would have already looked for ways to make sure that person went down. But to George, other than throwing his mouth off, he did nothing else. So, it was obvious to Jack that George was hiding his real identity. But what identity was it? George was stunned by Jack's question. He hadn't expected that Jack would ask something like that. But after a moment, he smiled bitterly as he thought to himself, "Oh, how can I forget that someone like him isn't simple?" After a moment of silence, George finally spoke. "To tell you the truth, I'm a member of Dante family. I'm the second son." George's reply was absolutely out of Jack's expectations. He had thought that George's identity wasn't small. Who knew that George was the second son of the largest family, the overlord of Inchoate City, Dante family? The owners of Dante Corporation. Although Jack was startled by the answer, the only reaction that was shown on his face was raising his brows a little. This reaction made George admire him more. He kept wondering, what did Jack experience for him to have such a stable mentality? As for the reason as to why I'm out there, it's to fulfill my end of a bet. I had bet with Ismail about 5 years ago that, the one that lost the bet would stop using their family's influence for 5 years. I lost the race and was banned from racing for 5 years. Upon seeing that Jack was listening, George continued. There's only a month before I can finish the price that I had to pay for losing the bet. To be exact, I only have 27 days till the end of it. George said all of this with some hint of dejection. Jack finally understood why the group could engage George. Furthermore, George was an easygoing person. He didn't put on the airs of a young master from the biggest family of a city at all. What made Jack admire him the most was the fact that he had been doing delivery work for almost 5 years. And he'd never gone back on his words. He made sure to keep his end of the bet. As for his character at work, he was truly determined to complete all the duties that had been assigned to him. So, Jack finally understood why he saw the name Dante on George's name. George was a low-profile person. So, even those that had given George the delivery work didn't know of his identity. Even Jack didn't link the two together. So, after the month is up, what are you going to do? Jack asked. I guess I'll stay with boss. I need to learn from you how to drive like a professional. Before going back to the racing competition, I'll have to improve my skills. George stated after a moment of silence. Jack turned and gazed at him for a moment before nodding. Okay then. If there's something that you need my assistance in, ask and I'll help whenever I can. George smiled. He knew that Jack wasn't simple. As a member of Dante family, he knew all too well about Brenda and Steve. He knew that all those that had gone against them in the past had suffered a considerable loss. But now, Jack was facing the two of them at the same time. But he didn't seem like a person that was getting overwhelmed. This implied that Jack had a way to deal with them. For that reason, George decided that he was going to maintain the relationship between them. After about 40 minutes of driving, he finally arrived at the palace. The traffic on the road had caused them to arrive after a longer period of time than when they were leaving the city. The reason for this being that, currently, it was 8 p.m. At this time, traffic was quite high. So, although Jack had made use of the not-so-popular roads, he still experienced traffic at the roundabouts that connected these roads to the busy highways. Of course, Jack made sure to send George home first before returning to the palace. Although Jack knew that George was a member of the Dante family, he wasn't going to help him in going against the bet that he made. If George wanted to use his family influence to get to live a better life, he would have done so. And since he didn't, then Jack helping him because of his family influence was something that he wouldn't do. The guards opened the gate as soon as they saw the Bentley's familiar registration number. They bowed to him as they welcomed him. Jack nodded to them before he parked the car in the parking lot. After getting into the mansion, he headed straight to his bedroom. Although the Bentley was quite comfortable to sit in unlike other sports cars, but sitting inside the Bentley Continental GT for over an hour had made him feel tired. This made him think of starting to drive the SUVs instead. But that would have to wait as currently, Jack wanted to see what rewards the system had given him. After taking a shower, he changed into his pajamas before laying on his back on the bed. Then, he stared at the system prompts that he'd received when he was on Mount Bright. Flyers Bank savings account received $10 million. Current balance is $36,790,607. You've earned $10 million. Multiplier applied. You've received $1 billion. First income. As a reward, you gain a customized Eurocopter EC-135. System task completed. Professional driving skill now permanently belongs to the host. He then took out his phone. There, he confirmed that he'd received another message. Flyers Bank savings account received $990 million. Current balance is $1,026,790,607. Looking at the huge balance, Jack decided that he needed to do something. It would be good to see some strings of zero instead of seeing so many numbers. With that thought, he decided that he would open another account. This new account would be the one that would be used by the financial department of the grocery department. Since he was still in the starting phase, he still needed more money. But, with over $1 billion, he could settle everything the following day. Then, there was something that made him more excited. That was the fact that, with the completion of the system's task, the professional driving skill was now his permanently. In other words, he was going to remain as the driving deity Jack. He wondered when he would receive another mission with a reward of skills. If he got something like business management, he would be able to ensure that his enterprise was making enough money. No, it should be maximizing the enterprise's profits and reputation. But, he didn't know when the system would give him such a reward again. But, he didn't lose hope as the system was still there. He still had things that would be rewarded as the first income reward. Just like the stores that he'd recently bought, the rewards had yet to be given to him. As for the last reward, the Eurocopter EC-135. That was the reward for the first income that he'd received from racing. He was wondering if he could participate in such races in different areas so that he could get even more rewards. But, it seemed impossible. The first-time income can only be repeated on the business, where you work to earn a profit, not where you receive the rewards of winning in a hobby. Is there a difference between them? Aren't they income all the same? Jack couldn't help but ask. True, both of them are incomes, but one is a hobby and another needs skills, determination, courage, decisiveness, and connections. There are many risks involved in business that could lead to heavy losses. On the other hand, in racing competitions, other than the registration fee, nothing else is lost if you don't win the race. Jack simply sighed at the system's logic. Then, he thought of something. What about the money that I can win after getting the first position in a race? The restriction is only applied on the first-time income reward. But, the multiplier still applies on the money that is earned from racing. After all, this is income. Jack shook his head helplessly. Then, he thought of the Eurocopter. Was it going to be delivered like the Bugatti Veyron was? As soon as this thought echoed in his mind, the system spoke. Since it's night and the system doesn't like to delay the rewards unless the host asks for it, the Eurocopter was delivered in the palace a long time ago and the guards have already been dealt with. No worries, you can just fly your Eurocopter freely. Jack was surprised. After all, he'd thought that the system would deliver the Eurocopter the same way the Bugatti was. Who knew that the system listened to his advice? After all, who does car delivery at night if there's no emergency? Where is it? I don't think there's a helipad here. Jack asked. There's one on the roof of the parking garage. Where's a parking garage? Jack asked curiously. He'd never seen one here. Once the walls of the parking lot are raised, the parking lot would become a parking garage. Chapter 26, Customized Eurocopter E-135. Jack was surprised again. As for the helipad, he didn't know what to say about it. He wondered if Sabrina had forgotten about it or she didn't know of its existence at all. Jack got out of the bed, forgetting about the tiredness of his body as he rushed towards the parking lot. From a distance, he could see that there was a white Eurocopter with several streaks of blue on top of the roof. Jack hurried his steps and arrived at the parking lot not long after. He tried looking around for a way to get to the Eurocopter that had landed on the roof, but he couldn't find any. System, why is the Eurocopter on the roof? You know, that's poor delivery service. After all, how am I supposed to fly it if I can't even reach it? After getting frustrated from not seeing a method of getting to the roof, he could only complain to the system. There's a way to get there. It's just that you don't know what you bought well. Just raise the walls. Once all the walls are up, there would be a staircase that leads to the top of the garage. Jack couldn't help but complain, how am I supposed to know everything in all of this big compound without spending some time? See, even the one that sold it to me didn't tell me about it. Maybe she didn't know that it existed there. After saying these words to the system, Jack then thought of something important. By the way, system, how did you know that there was a staircase here? Nothing in this blue planet can be hidden from this system. Jack. After pressing the button for the walls to rise, Jack waited for about a minute before everything was in place. Looking at the garage that had been formed, Jack could only admire the designer even more. After all, when the walls were taken down, they would hide below the interlocking tiles that would take their place. But, once they were raised, the garage looked no different from a normal built one. He couldn't even see the places that the four walls joined together. If a person was seeing this for the first time, she would have thought that the walls weren't divided into four. Jack got into the garage. The place was well lit, just like the compound that had no black spots. The lighting inside the garage was faint blue. He didn't know why they had chosen that color anyway. Looking around, he tried finding the staircase that the system had spoken of. But, no matter where he looked, he couldn't find it. He had no choice but to ask the system. "You're hopeless." Looking at the door that leads to the garage's back, there should be a switch there. Once pressed, the staircase would be formed. Jack could swear that he had heard the system's robotic voice sighing. But, he still agreed that he was hopeless in this situation and could only depend on the system. After arriving at the door that led to the back of the garage, Jack saw that there was indeed a small switch. It had the word staircase written on it. After flicking the switch, there was a buzzing sound as the structure of the garage changed. All the cars were moved to the side using the tiles. It was like the ground was opening in the center of the garage. If there was a car that was parked there, it would be moved to the side or it would be placed on a top position of the other cars. These rising tiles were supported by strong steel bars. Jack was surprised that such a system was present in the garage. He couldn't help but wonder how advanced the helipad was. After the ground at the center was opened up, a rotating staircase was raised. Alongside it was a path that could be followed by a car. Just like the staircase, it was winding. The starting position was at the entrance of the garage. It fit well on the open space in that a person might think that it had always been there. Jack got out of his stupor only after seeing that the movements had stopped. He staggered towards the staircase. Looking upwards, he could see that, almost at the edge of the garage's roof, there was an opening. In fact, there were two of them. One for the bigger path and the other for the staircase. Jack climbed the staircase and arrived on top of the roof of the garage. There, he found that the place was quite big when looking at it from this point. But now, there was a customized Eurocopter that was at the center of the roof. The roof itself was well lit by ground bulbs, so, although it was night, he could see the Eurocopter very well. The helipad was just like the others. He couldn't see any difference. Looks like he had his hopes too high for nothing. Then, he wondered to himself, when coming back, he didn't notice this Eurocopter. It wasn't like there were no lights. It was clear as day in the palace. The Eurocopter was delivered only after you had entered the mansion. Finally, Jack nodded in understanding. Then, he stared at the outward appearance of the Eurocopter. The EC-135 had at least a length of 16 meters, width of 4 meters and a height of 8 meters. The fuselage of the Eurocopter was at least 12 meters long. The diameters of main and tail rotors were 11 meters and 1 meter respectively. As for the roof where the helipad was, it was 40 by 45. So, although the Eurocopter was wide, it still fit well. The garage where the cars could be parked was only the size of 35 by 36. The extra space was obviously for the walls that could be raised and lowered at will. System, no introduction of the Eurocopter here? Jack asked curiously. This was his first time being closer to an aircraft. He'd left Crystal City for the first time in his life when he came here in Inchoate City. After a moment of silence, just when Jack thought that the system wouldn't reply, a pile of information was dumped into his mind while the system's voice echoed. EC-135 is a multi-mission twin-engine helicopter manufactured by Eurocopter. The helicopter offers extended range and payload capacities, while delivering low-noise operations. The EC-135 helicopter is widely operated by police forces, emergency medical services, EMS, and charter companies. The EC-135 can conduct homeland security, law enforcement, passenger and VIP transport, search and rescue, SAR, and EMS operations. The EC-135 has a length of 16.16 meters, width of 4.65 meters and a height of 8.51 meters. The fuselage of the helicopter is 12.2 meters long. The diameters of main and tail rotors are 11.2 meters and 1.4 meters respectively. The helicopter can be equipped with a rescue hoist, searchlight, forward-looking infrared, FLIR, camera and LOJAC tracker to support law enforcement missions. The spacious cabin has a volume of 12.9 cubic meters. It has a single level and is provided with unobstructed flat floor, providing a very high load capability of 1,400 kilograms. The wide cabin also offers outstanding visibility for observation operations. The flat floor and rails ensure the users to install medical devices or mission-specific equipment. The two wide sliding doors and the two rear-hinged clamshell doors allow the entry and exit of occupants. The cabin can accommodate 9 to 10 passengers in its standard configuration. The EC-135 is provided with two engine options, including Turbomeca Arias 2B2 and the Pratt & Whitney Kaga PW206B2. The two engines are equipped with full authority digital engine control, FADEC, fire detectors, and an overspeed protection system. Each engine develops a maximum takeoff power of 953 kilowatts. The EC-135 can fly at a maximum speed of 543 kilometers per hour. The maximum operating altitude is 25,000 feet. The helicopter can climb at a rate of 5.6 meters per second. Its maximum range with standard tanks is 1,700 kilometers. The EC-135 is customized and performs better than others. It has the name of the current owner, Jack, written on either side of the tail. It has an advanced autopilot system. Accompanying this is an advanced AI that can take simple instructions from the owner. Furthermore, it can use the owner's biological data to ensure the Eurocopter's anti-theft security. Jack hadn't expected that the system would give him so much information at once. He almost felt that his head was going to burst from the overloaded information. After taking a deep breath, he felt that he was no longer feeling dizzy. Now, as he focused his gaze onto the Eurocopter, he could gain some understanding of it. Now that all that was out of the way, Jack wanted to see the interior. According to the system, this aircraft could carry 2 crew members and about 10 passengers. He got closer to the aircraft. As soon as he stretched his hand, touching the handleless door, it suddenly moved to the side before he heard a robotic voice. "Welcome, Master. I am Eco, the EC-135's AI, here at your service." Who knew that the AI was so advanced? Jack then stepped into the EC-135. The space inside was huge. And just like in the system's description, it could accommodate at least 10 people at the same time. He then entered the cockpit. There, he looked at the many buttons that were there. He took a deep breath as he muttered, "Although the Bugatti Veyron also has many buttons, but it is different from this. Eco, can you tell me about this plane?" He shook his head before asking Eco, the plane's AI, about the plane. Eco gave a simple description of the plane. It was no different from what the system had told him. And then, now came a question: how was the plane going to fly? He didn't know how to fly the plane, this was his first time on one. System, can I get the professional flying skill? Jack thought of the professional driving skills and asked the system expectantly. No. The professional driving skills were given to you because the emergency mode had been activated. For you to get skills, you'll have to work harder so that you can activate the skill rewards. Jack, what is the use of having a car if you can't drive it? What's the use of having an aircraft if you can't fly it? Chapter 27, Come Back Next Year. What is the use of having a car if you can't drive it? What's the use of having an aircraft if you can't fly it? Just find a person who can do it. Problem solved. For real, Jack didn't know what to do next. But all the same, he decided not to think about it for now. He would think about it another time. So, he went back to the mansion and took a good rest. When he woke up the following day, he found several system notifications hanging in front of him. You've earned $1,183,530. Multiplier applied. You've received $118,353,000. 13 new first income rewards received. In accumulation period. After removing the notifications from the front of his vision, Jack took the phone on the bedside table and looked at the bank message. Flyers bank savings account received $117,169,470. Your balance is $1,143,960,077. Jack had told the managers that the income would be handed in at the end of the week. For that reason, Jack only received the bonus that came after the multiplier. Now, it was already 7 in the morning. So, he got out of bed and headed downstairs to prepare breakfast for himself. After he finished preparing the food, he headed to the gym to do some workouts. After an hour, he took a shower before going back to the kitchen for his breakfast. Since he had been in the gym for over an hour, the food had already gotten cold. With no other choice, he put them in the oven to warm them up for a while. Fried eggs, several slices of toasted bread, and a cup of coffee. After that, he decided to start by visiting Homescope Properties Limited. He wanted to finish the payment for the palace. After all, how could a billionaire like him have a small debt of tens of millions? In fact, it was less than 20 million. He changed into a white shirt, a pair of navy blue pants, white sneakers, and a black leather jacket. Getting out of the mansion, he went to the garage. The walls were still raised and nothing had changed since he left the previous day. Going to the switch, he flicked it and everything went back to being normal as the staircase and pathway disappeared into the ground. In the garage, there was a Bentley Continental GT, a Suzuki, and a Bugatti Veyron. Currently, the Bentley Bentayga was being parked at the apartment that he'd gotten George, Agnes, and Charles. Even the Freightliner was there. He drove the Bentley out of the compound, heading straight towards Homescope Properties Limited. Within 30 minutes or so, he'd already gotten to the building where the Homescope Properties Limited was located. After parking the car, he headed straight in. Jack's current style, although not that much of a show of strength, showed that he could at least afford some properties, either renting or buying. So, the moment that he entered, a lady went forward to greet him. "Hi handsome, would you like to buy a house?" The lady asked with a smile. "I'm sorry. But, I'm here to complete the payment." Jack replied sincerely. He looked at the crowd and noticed that the lady that had attended to him previously wasn't present. So, he couldn't depend on her to complete the procedures. "Can I get the manager?" he asked the lady. The lady wasn't happy at all. After all, she thought that Jack was here to buy a house. In that way, she could earn a commission. Who knew that he was here to pay the money for a house that he took on installments? "I'm sorry, but the manager is busy," the girl replied plainly. Her face no longer had that smile that was on when she was welcoming him. Jack was surprised by such a drastic change in attitude. But, he wasn't here to joke, he was here to complete the payment before going to look for a building that could act like the headquarters of Jackson Enterprise. "So, how am I going to be helped here?" Jack asked. "I don't know, maybe come back tomorrow?" the lady answered, her tone getting slightly irritated. Jack raised his brows. It was currently close to 9 in the morning. How could the manager be busy as early in the morning and that she couldn't even attend to him? "Can you let her know that I'm the one here?" "I'm sure that she'll let me see her," Jack asked. "I'm sorry, but I can't do it." The lady shook her head vehemently. It seemed that the conversation between them had attracted the attention of other salesladies. Currently, there were only a few clients present in the floor on which Jack was on. 6 salesladies came and one of them asked, "What's going on, Gloria?" "Humph, this guy over here came here to pay for a small house that he'd gotten through hire purchase. Now, he says that he wants to see the manager." Gloria said all of these with her expression filled with disdain. Jack was surprised. What the heck? When did he buy a small house? He'd purchased the biggest house that they had. And now, he was being told that he had purchased a small one? "Oh, handsome, what Gloria said is right. Currently, our manager is quite busy. So, you'll have to come back next week." After hearing Gloria's words, one of the ladies spoke. Jack was stunned speechless. From a single day to a whole week. What a big difference. Just as he thought that this was it, another lady spoke. "You should come back next month. Only then will you have a higher chance of meeting the manager." No, next year will be better. So, you should leave now. Right, you should leave now, no need to block the path. Yes, there's too much traffic here. Jack could only stare at them without having a word to say. Next month, what work was Sabrina doing that it would keep her busy for a whole week? Blocking the path? Aren't you the ones blocking the path? Traffic? You're the ones that are gathered around me. Furthermore, the whole floor is almost empty. What do you mean by saying that this place was getting congested? Seeing that their words were getting even more weird the more they spoke, Jack had no choice but to call Sabrina. Otherwise, he wasn't sure that he could handle all of this. Who are you calling? A lady asked curiously. The manager, Jack replied sincerely. The lady sneered and said, Do you think that the manager gives her phone number to anyone? Let me see you call her. You can't just brag in front of me. Jack simply shook his head as he saw that the other ladies were about to start talking. It seemed that these ladies who always fought each other for a client were quite united. Anyway, he called Sabrina. In 2 rings, the phone was received. Then, Sabrina's surprised and excited voice came from the other side. Hello, Mr. Jack. Why are you calling me? She asked. Well, I came here to complete the payments, but your staff members are saying that you're busy and that I'll have to come back next year. Jack said the most recent time that he was told to come back. What? How dare they? I'm sorry, Mr. Jack, I'll be there in a minute. Sabrina shouted from the other end. Jack could hear the sound of things moving and he could guess that Sabrina was rushing from her office. Jack then hung up the call. He decided not to say a word and wait for Sabrina to come down. What did she say? Right, did she say that she'll fire us? Did you get someone to pretend to be the manager? Jack wondered if these ladies had taken some medicine that made them irritated. So, he decided to keep his mouth shut, his face showing no changes in emotion, and at the same time, he ignored whatever they were saying. Upon seeing that Jack was ignoring them, these ladies were angered further. They began shouting and slandering him of causing trouble here. A small crowd that wanted to watch the show had already gathered. But all the same, Jack didn't react. The ladies were getting more and more angry when they saw this. They were just about to forget about their manners and start cursing him when hurried footsteps approached them. Followed by that was an angry shout, What do you think you're doing? It was Sabrina's voice. The ladies were surprised when they heard this voice. Their bodies trembled when they saw Sabrina approaching them with anger shown on her face. She shoved some of them aside and approached Jack. She then gave a slight bow and said, Mr. Jack, I'm sorry that I've shown you this embarrassing side. The ladies were stunned. Then, they began sweating even more while trying to find what Jack's identity was. If even their manager had to apologize by bowing, then who were they, just small-time salespersons, to dare and shout in front of him? Upon seeing how sincere she was, Jack had no intention of making things difficult for her. So, it's okay. Nothing bad happened. Sabrina heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing that Jack wasn't angry. She admired him even more as she had heard from afar how the ladies were slandering Jack and shouting at him. She then shifted her gaze towards the 6 ladies. Do you know what you've done? Do you know who he is? He's the one that bought the Prince and Princess Palace, Mr. Jack Alfonso. Sabrina's words were like bombs in the hearts of the 6 ladies. They could only stare blankly at Jack, not knowing what to do next. In this, they weren't alone as the fence-sitting fans were left wide-eyed. Chapter 28, Business Overlord Building. From this moment on, you're no longer part of the staff of Homescope Properties Limited. Pack up and leave at this moment. Sabrina's words were stern and decisive. She knew all too well that Jack wasn't someone that could be offended. After all, purchasing a mansion for over $30 million, although it wasn't the original price, showed that he had to have assets worth $100 million in the least. To be able to take out that liquid amount of money when most of their wealth was in terms of assets, he sure had to be a wealthy person. The ladies tried to beg for forgiveness, but Sabrina had none of it. So, they could only try asking Jack for forgiveness. After all, It wasn't something easy for them to get the job as salespersons in a big real estate agency like Homescope Properties Limited. But no matter how they begged, Jack ignored them. His reasoning was clear: everyone had to bear the consequences of their actions. After all, they were salesladies and they had just tried driving out a client. That was already out of character for a salesperson. Not to mention the fact that they had slandered him. He could as well sue them, but he didn't have time to waste on such minor things. On seeing that Jack had no intention of forgiving them, the ladies could only leave dejectedly. But as they left, they stared daggers at Gloria. "Gloria, didn't you say that he'd just purchased a small house on hire purchase? I didn't know that he was a big shot. He's wearing simple clothes. So, I guessed that he wasn't rich." Gloria replied with a low and guilty voice. "You guessed? You were making guesses instead of asking first? You'll have to see how we're going to get food." "I'll settle the balance in one bulk," Jack stated upon seeing that there would be nobody causing trouble again. Sabrina was stunned once again. One had to know that the price of Prince and Princess Palace was at least $38 million. After giving 10% discount, it was $34.2 million. Jack's current balance was $14.2 million. He had previously paid a deposit of $20 million. Now, he said that he was going to complete the payment. One had to know that Jack had given an estimate that he would finish the payment in a month, which was seen as a short period of time. Now, not even a week had gone by and he was here to complete the payment for the mansion. Sabrina was both excited and worried. She wondered if Jack had decided to complete the payment at once so that he could cut ties with them. "Mr. Jack, I hope you can forgive my incompetence in managing my subordinates," Sabrina said sincerely. Jack was once again surprised. He wondered to himself, what's up with people nowadays? Have I not said that this matter is nothing big? Why is she looking at me as if I'm going to punish her? It's okay. In fact, I wanted to buy another building. Jack waved his hand helplessly as he stated these words. With $1 billion in his account, he could now afford to buy an office building. In this way, the headquarters would be established. If he could get the building here, there would be no need for him to run around in the city looking for a building to buy. Jack's words immediately elevated Sabrina's mood. But she was even more angry at the six ladies. They had almost lost such a big client. "This way, please." Sabrina led Jack to the top floor, where her office was located in several high-end mansions, villas and buildings models were. Jack looked at the buildings and said, "I want the best building present in the city. It doesn't matter how much the price is, I'll take it." Sabrina smiled sweetly as she said, "We're the best real estate agency in the city. So, we have the best buildings, mansions and villas to be sold or rented out in the city." Jack nodded. The Prince and Princess Palace was a good example of what Sabrina was saying. Sabrina gave him several recommendations before she brought him to the masterpiece. It was a 30-story building. It was known as the Business Overlord Building. From the model present here, Jack could see that it was good enough to be used as the headquarters of Jackson Enterprise. The parking space was ample enough. That was the surfaces. Then, there was an underground parking as well. There were two different types of elevators present. One that could access all the floors and one that could only access the top floor. Furthermore, there was a smart system that was installed in the building. For example, a person would just need to say the floor that she was going to and the elevator would take them there. The office building itself was located at the very center of the city. It was the tallest building present in Inchoate City. The others around it, the tallest amongst them was only 23-story. The sides of the building were covered in floor-to-ceiling glass. These hardened glasses had a special feature: one could look outside from inside but not vice versa. Jack nodded. This building was modern. This was what he needed currently. So, he had the intention of buying it. Currently, the Dante family has the intention of buying it. But, I can give you a priority as they have not yet made a decision in whether to buy it or not. Sabrina said. I'm taking it now. What's the price? Upon hearing that there was someone already eyeing his building, Jack made a decision. He'll buy the building before they noticed. In this way, he could get the building that was now considered a landmark of Inchoate City. The total cost of the building is $700 million. This is adding all the costs of processing the certificates, the deeds and licenses. Sabrina said this as she eyed Jack expectantly. If it was another person, even if they were a member of the Big Five of Inchoate City, she wouldn't talk about the price so casually. She would definitely talk about the price of a floor in the building. But Jack had a mysterious identity. And he had the surname Alfonso. So, she knew that he might be related to Crystal City's Alfonso family. That family was far bigger than Dante family. If they wanted to purchase that building, they wouldn't have much of a trouble. Why is it so? Jack asked but was interrupted by Sabrina. Expensive? That's due to the equipment and the technology found there. Furthermore, it's the landmark of Inchoate City. Any person that will set up her business there would have her reputation boosted. Sabrina said. Though, the light in her eyes dimmed slightly. I meant to say that, it's quite cheaper than I expected. Jack corrected. The price surprised Jack a lot. He had expected that such a building would be worth at least $1 billion. Who knew that it was only slightly over $500 million? Ah! Sabrina's mouth hung open as her eyes bulged in their sockets. She didn't know how to react in this situation. One had to know that an office building was expensive than a mansion. After all, the office had more commercial value than a mansion. This was the reason as to why Prince and Princess Palace, although it wasn't expensive considering its level, but its commercial value was lower than an office building. Although it could be rented, those who could rent such a mansion were small in number in the city. Full payment for both the palace and the office building. Here's the card, Jack said while handing over his card. Sabrina came out of her stupor as she stared at Jack incredulously. She looked at the normal card as she wondered, how rich is he in that such a large sum of money is placed in a normal card? One had to know that in a bank, there were different types of cards. There were normal cards that could be used by anyone as long as they had their savings in the bank. Then, there were VIP cards that could be given only after a certain amount of money was deposited in the account. But still, there were different levels of VIP cards. There were those for $1 million deposit, 10 million, 50 million, 100 million, 500 million being the last one. As for Jack, who was spending $714.2 million at once, he had to have a deposit of more than $500 million. For that, he would be given a special card by the bank. With trembling hands, Sabrina took the card. Although she trusted Jack, she still had to confirm that there was the required amount of money in the card. After all, Jack's card was a normal one. After swiping the card, she handed the machine to Jack, who then inserted his PIN before handing it back to her. Upon seeing so many figures, Sabrina's hands trembled even more. After about a minute, she completed the payment and handed the card back to Jack with both of her hands, as if afraid that the card would fall down. Mr. Jack, I've completed the payment for the Prince and Princess Palace. But, for the office building, the amount is so high. So, we will have to go to the bank to get the transaction done, or you'll have to get a higher level card, Sabrina said after Jack received the card. Jack nodded in understanding. It seemed that he could complete what he wanted to do in the bank during this trip. He could open a separate account for the grocery department and Jackson Enterprise. Let's head there then, Jack said as he led the way to the elevator. Sabrina followed closely, giving Jack even more respect after seeing the balance. After all, that was all in liquid state, not to mention about the assets. One could only imagine his wealth. Chapter 29, Celine. After getting out of the building under the gazes of several salespersons and some of the customers that had seen what had happened but had yet to leave, they got into Jack's Bentley Continental GT. Although Sabrina had a car as well, it was only worth about $4 million. On the other hand, Jack's was worth $7 million. Driving the Bentley, Jack headed towards Flyers Bank. In about 15 minutes, they arrived at the bank. Unlike other businesses, the bank was quite isolated. It was like the bank building had its own space. The building was quite big and was a 7-story one. As Jack looked at the building, he couldn't help but wonder to himself, what's the use of this big building anyway? Not like they're storing all the deposited money here, right? He had opened his account in Crystal City. The bank building there was even bigger than the one here. It was a 10-story building. According to what he knew, the bulk of the deposited money was taken to the headquarters where security was higher. Jack had decided on this bank when opening his account. The reason for this was simple. He knew that with the level of this bank, it wasn't something that the Alfonso family could put their hands in. After all, Flyers Bank was a national-level bank. Its reputation was far too high for the Alfonso family to have an influence on it. In other words, no matter what Alfonso family did, they couldn't freeze his accounts like they could do if he had opened an account with smaller banks. Do you know why they used such a big building when they are a service industry? Jack asked Sabrina as they headed into the bank building. Sabrina stared at Jack for a moment before replying. Most of it is to showcase their reputation as a big bank. After all, how could such a big bank have a branch that shares a floor with a smaller company? Jack nodded in understanding. After all, he wouldn't allow his enterprise to own a floor. No, he would buy a whole building. But each department would have a floor of their own. But compared to him who was going to venture into different industries, the Flyers Bank was exaggerating too much. Why not get a 3 or maybe 4-story building? Anyway, that wasn't going to affect the reason for his presence here. After getting inside the lobby area of the bank, he could see that the bank was already busy. It was already 9 in the morning and the businesses had been opened already. Looking at the long lines at the teller's windows and the already filled-up lobby area, Jack shook his head. These guys sure have business, he thought to himself. Then, he led Sabrina towards the elevator. After pressing the button, he found that it wasn't opening. Then, he noticed that it was moving, so he decided to wait. Ding! Not long after, the elevator door opened. Jack and Sabrina were ready to enter after the person inside came out. But, as Jack stared inside the open elevator, his blue eyes met with a pair of green eyes. And then, it was as if time had frozen. Jack was drawn into the familiar green eyes that he'd always been thinking or dreaming about. Now, as he stared into them, his heart skipped a beat for a moment. As others got out of the elevator and others entered, Jack stayed rooted on the spot as he stared at the beauty. This was the lady that he'd met at the government building before. He could still remember the feeling of holding her in his hands. He could still remember the special scent that she emitted back then. Jack wasn't the only one who had stopped all his actions to stare at the other. The girl was also staring at him. She wasn't moving at all. Celine POV, today, we came to Flyers Bank to open a business account. I was going to help a friend of mine in setting up a business before she came back from abroad. On this day, after we were done with the procedures, it was time to leave. With the business account being a VIP one, I was assured that there would be no delays in the business transactions. After getting into the elevator, there were 5 other people inside. I looked at Faith, my personal secretary. She was a few years older than me and had been working before I entered into business. She had worked under my mother and had learnt a lot from her. When I began managing some of our family businesses, my mother asked Faith to be my personal secretary so that she could assist me in the line of work as I tried putting into action all that I had learnt from my parents since being young. Faith, do you think that the business will succeed? I asked. This was the first time that I was starting a business from scratch. Although I was using some of the family connections, but most of it depended on one's hard work. Don't worry about it, young miss. Everything is okay. I've checked it all too well. The fashion and textiles industry has been doing quite well recently. Furthermore, we're starting one here in Inchoate City. So, it's a sure bet that there would be no competition here considering the family's strength and connections. Faith replied with a confident voice. I felt assured. So, I took a deep breath to suppress the nervousness in my heart. Although I was domineering and cold in front of my subordinates, I knew that I was a girl after all. But, I had to put a tough front in front of my subordinates so that I could gain their respect. Of course, our talk was in whispers. Looking at the number as the elevator descended, I prepared myself to get out of the elevator. We still had a lot of things to do as the business was just starting. Ding! Ground floor. The elevator reached the ground floor as a robotic voice said the floor that we were on, which was the ground floor. As the doors moved to either side, I was about to step out of the elevator when my body froze. My eyes had met with blue eyes. The same blue eyes as a few days ago. The ones that made my heart beat faster and make me lose my composure. For some reason, I didn't move and could only stare at the blue eyes that stared back into mine with deep emotions. From his eyes I could see curiosity, confusion, stubbornness and other emotions. I didn't know what to do in this situation as my mind was blank. Everything but these eyes faded away. For some reason, these blue eyes were familiar. I'm sure that, other than in the government building, I've never met this unique and handsome man somewhere before. Well, I wasn't sure if he was a man or a youth. From his appearance, he should be the same age as me. Just as I continued staring into his eyes, I felt someone shaking me. When I came back to my senses and averted my gaze from his eyes, I looked at Faith, who was staring at me with eyes full of worry and suspicion. I could see that she was pointing towards the impatient people in the elevator. We were supposed to get off the elevator, so Faith had stopped the doors from closing. The elevator could only move after the doors were closed. Since almost every person that came to Flyers Bank was a busy person, they were getting impatient waiting. Before I could speak, I was pulled out by Faith. By coincidence or not, as Faith was pulling me out of the elevator, I bumped onto him again. Before I could fall, I felt his arm wrap around my waist. If it were another person, another man, holding my waist, I would have already lashed out. But, in his strong arms, all resistance was smashed away. I couldn't react at all, and all I could do was to stare into his deep blue eyes. I was just about to get drowned into those eyes when Faith pulled me, pulling me from his arms and out of my trance. I shook my head as I was pulled by Faith, who was looking at me worriedly. I couldn't help but glance at the closing elevator as we left. After getting to the parking lot inside my pink Chevrolet Corvette, Faith looked at me and asked, "What's going on, young miss?" "I don't know. For some reason, that person, I don't know why I lose my composure in front of him," I replied sincerely. Faith stared at me suspiciously. She asked, "Are you sure that you've never met him before? After all, this isn't the first time that you reacted in such a way. Last time we met, you stared into each other's eyes in a daze." "Last time?" I asked subconsciously as I remembered what had happened on that day. We were going to the government building to get a license for the business that we were going to start. I had gotten out of the meeting late on that day. So, I hurried to the office before they closed it. By coincidence or accident, we bumped into each other. If he hadn't held me, I would have fallen onto the ground. Faith stared at me for a while. But, I didn't even notice that my mind had already wandered away. Feeling my body being shaken, I looked at Faith, who was staring at me worriedly with tensed-up brows. After all, this was the first time that I was acting in such a way. I could have given him a beating in there. It was just that, he didn't do it intentionally and he didn't speak to. Otherwise, I would have said that he was creating a scene to chase after you. Faith this with gritted teeth as she spoke like a big sister. I could only chuckle as her expression looked funny to me. Of course, this side of me was only shown to her and my parents. "Let's get going. We still have a lot to do," I said to Faith before driving the Chevrolet Corvette away. Chapter 30, Black Card. After Jack got into the elevator, his thoughts were still out of place. And this was noticed by Sabrina. But she didn't say a word. Though, this didn't imply that she wasn't curious about it. This was the first time that she'd seen him have such a change in expression. Not even the Prince and Princess Palace made him have such a drastic change. Although he was pleased by the mansions when she was showing him around, she didn't see him smiling happily. But what made her curious the most was that the reaction of the both of them were the same. They stopped so as they could stare at the other. According to what she could see, the two of them had to have a history in the very least. According to the way none of them was angry nor was happy, then, something that had happened before had to be something ambiguous in that they didn't know whether to be angry or to be happy about it. As her thoughts took her further and further, they arrived at the top floor of the 7-story building. Of course, the elevator had stopped at some floors to let out those that were going to that specific floor. Ding! 7th floor. The sound of the elevator's sound system brought the duo out of their thoughts. They were the only ones left in the elevator at that moment. As they stepped out of the elevator, they were greeted by the setting that was quite uncommon. There was an open space and a lobby. At the very end of it, there was a desk where there was a lady who seemed to be in her mid-20s. In front of the desk was a plaque that had the word secretary written on. Behind her, there was a door that led to an office. The door was currently closed. Besides that, there was nothing else that they could see other than the normal decorations and the water dispenser. After reaching the front desk, Jack went straight to the point. "Hello, I would like to upgrade my card." As he said that, he took out his card and handed it over to the lady behind the desk. The lady looked at the card before shifting her attention back to Jack. Jack's clothing had no brand at all. This implied that the clothes that he was wearing were from stalls. Although she was skeptical about it, she decided to confirm first. After all, these rich people had different tastes. As for the lady beside him, although she was having branded clothes, they weren't that expensive. This indicated that she wasn't that rich. But what made her take Jack somehow serious was the fact that the lady that was wearing branded clothes was respectful to him just from her expression. After typing on her computer's keyboard for a while, she asked for Jack's ID. After taking it, she continued typing down without saying another word. After a minute or so, she raised her head as she stared at Jack incredulously. This was the first time that she was seeing such a long string of numbers in a normal bank card. Debit card, of course. "Is there something wrong?" Jack asked after seeing that the lady was simply staring and saying nothing else. Sabrina stifled her chuckling after seeing the secretary's expression. She knew how shocking this was. After all, this was $1 billion in liquidity. Such a huge amount of money would usually be found in VIP level cards. But here it was. In the lowest level card found in the Flyers bank. I'm sorry for that," the secretary apologized quickly as her attitude shifted almost 180 degrees. She was now more respectful to Jack than before. "I'll complete the procedures in a minute or so. Please, you can fill this form while I inform the manager about this," she said as she handed a form to Jack. Jack received the form before retreating to the lobby area of the floor. Taking the pen that was on the table, he removed the cap before he began filling in the details on the form. As he was filling the form, the secretary rushed into the office behind her desk. She even forgot about the etiquette of knocking before entering. Inside the gigantic office, there was a luxurious desk, 2 chairs in front of it and another behind it where a man was seated on it. Behind the desk, there was another door leading to another room. As soon as the man heard the door opening and the rushing sound of footsteps, he raised his head that was currently staring fixedly on the computer screen. He frowned upon seeing the agitated secretary. "What's wrong, Ms. Ivy?" he asked with a deep voice that was laced with discontent. Upon hearing the voice and the tone, the secretary, Ivy, realized her mistake. She quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, Mr. Heyman. I was quite agitated there that I forgot about my etiquette." Heyman was a man in his late 40s, nearing his 50s. But one could already see that there were small streaks of gray hair in his short black hair that was combed backwards. His aura was authoritative. He was someone that was used to being in power. He asked, "Calm down and tell me what's wrong." "Mr. Heyman, there's a youth out there with a bank card that has over $1 billion deposit," she replied hastily, making sure to emphasize on the word billion. "What's there to be so agitated about? It's just $1 million. How many millions are deposited daily?" Heyman casually waved his hand as he returned his gaze to the screen. Ivy was stunned speechless. She then wondered to herself, have I not stressed the word billion enough? Or, is the manager not paying attention? Just as she was about to correct him, Heyman's expression changed drastically as the words that Ivy had just said finally registered themselves in his mind. He jumped onto his feet, staring Ivy silly. This was the second time that Heyman had reacted out of his normal. The first time wasn't that long, just about 5 or so minutes before when that lady and her assistant came in. They were from a big background. So, for them to actually visit their branch here, it was an honor to them. Now, here was another person that caused such a big reaction from the manager. She wondered to herself what day it was. After thinking things through, it was Saturday. On this day, there were a few people that visited the bank, or most of those that visited weren't big clients. Although it could be said that the bank was quite full, that was only on the lower floor, where those with normal accounts received services. Heyman got from behind his desk and grabbed Ivy by her shoulders before shaking her while asking, "Where is he? Why haven't you welcomed him inside? Go and bring him in." "No, I'll go and greet him myself." The volley of questions gave Ivy no time to react before Heyman dashed out of the office. Ivy was lost in thoughts for a moment, thinking about how her boss had lost his composure. Then, she hurriedly followed him out. After filling the form, Jack was just about to place it on the counter when the office door swung open and a man in his late 40s rushed out hurriedly. He looked around, completely ignoring Jack and Sabrina. He frowned. He was just about to talk when Ivy rushed out from the wide-open door. "Where's he?" Agitatedly, Heyman asked Ivy. Ivy was stunned again. Then, she shifted her gaze towards Jack, who was looking at them blankly. But she didn't speak a word. Her reaction caused Heyman to frown. But he followed her gaze and turned towards Jack. Just from the expression on her face as she looked at Jack, he could tell that it was Jack who had such a balance. But this had stunned him. He was expecting to see a middle-aged man like him, or maybe an old man. Who knew that the super rich person was a young man? Of course, super rich for Inchoate City. His expression changed to that of slight embarrassment as he strode towards Jack. He had just ignored Jack not long ago. After reaching before Jack, he stretched his hand out for a handshake while introducing himself. "Hello, I'm Heyman Biko, the manager of Flyers Bank, Inchoate City branch." "Hello," Jack shook his hand and replied simply. Ahem. Heyman knew that this was due to his previous attitude when he was trying to find the super rich middle-aged or old man. He'd completely forgotten that Ivy had said that there was a youth out there. It was only now that her words were fully registering into his mind after being stirred by the word billion. "Mr." He was just about to invite Jack into the office when he remembered that he didn't know Jack's name. So, he could only awkwardly stammer as he looked at Jack. Jack shook his head helplessly as he introduced himself. "You can call me Jack." "Yes, Mr. Jack." "Please, welcome into my office and have a cup of tea or coffee." He said this while eyeing Ivy. Ivy immediately understood what he meant and was ready to begin preparing both so that Jack could choose. "Okay," Jack nodded before turning his gaze towards Sabrina, who was still seated on the sofa in the lobby area. "Come with me." Sabrina was at first stunned before she got ecstatic. She knew that no matter what, she wasn't qualified to enter the manager's office of Flyers Bank. But now, Jack was giving her a chance. So, she quickly nodded and followed them into the office. Jack observed the simple but elegant furnishing of the office and nodded to himself in appreciation. After seating on the chair alongside Sabrina, who sat only after Jack sat down, Jack went into business. "I'd like to upgrade the level of my bank card, after which, I'd like to do a transfer," Jack said. Upon seeing that Jack was such a straightforward person, Heyman didn't try flattering him and nodded before he began typing in Jack's details on the form on his computer's keyboard. "According to the amount of money in your account, you have the right to claim a black card from our bank.